Hey everyone, welcome to class. I'm Jeremy, Dr. Roy's teaching assistant for this class. And yeah, this is your class, Roy. I'm gonna mute myself and just kind of let you take over.
All right. Okay, so I thought we should do something a little bit different than, sort of my normal focus. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do that was just to get a break. And maybe, I'm gonna say it's fun, but it's Civil War, so it's brutal. And I want this to be more like a class than just a lecture. So I can't actually see the questions, but if you guys do ask questions, Jeremy will sort of screen them. And if he thinks there's a good question, he'll interrupt me and ask it, which is a desirable outcome as far as I'm concerned. So I want to start with, this is going to surprise literally everybody, background. I don't want to just dive straight into the United States Civil War. I want to explain how we got to that place where we had a civil war. And to do that, what I need to do is I need to first found the United States, and then I need to talk about the United States Constitution, and then the years from the United States founding all the way to the Civil War. Now, I want to do this relatively quickly, so I want to do this probably in two parts. I'm assuming it's going to be this week and next week. And then that means that the last four classes will be focused on the Civil War. But there's no way to understand the Civil War without understanding the background. So that's why I'm starting there. So the most important thing, I guess, in terms of figuring out the background is figuring out why the English even made the colonies. And the architect behind this was Queen Elizabeth I. So Queen Elizabeth I was the kind of leader that the world gets once every few centuries. There's this leader that just is several orders of magnitude better than everybody around them. And she's that person. She was a visionary. And, there are dreamers all over the world right now as we speak. Most dreamers don't do anything about it. She definitely did something about it. She had this belief, which when you look at it at the time, looks preposterous. But obviously she was proven right. She had the belief that England would eventually become a great empire. Now, she wouldn't see it in her lifetime. There was no way for England to go that quickly into becoming that empire. She wanted to lay the foundation for it with the understanding that, 2 centuries after her death, maybe England would be that great empire. So in and of itself, that makes her an extraordinary leader, because most leaders think 2 years out, not 200 years out. But she had a problem. So England was essentially a resource-poor place. It turns out that Scotland has oil, England doesn't really, and it turns out that Wales had coal, and England has some coal. But coal is, a 19th century thing, and oil is a 21st century thing. In other words, for her purposes, England didn't have any kind of exciting resource because, right, she's 16th century. She's too early for those to matter. She had wool. So she understood something that I think people sometimes miss. If you want to make a great empire or a great state or a powerful state, the single most important thing you can do is build a powerful economy. A powerful military can't exist without a powerful economy. Economy comes first. My kids and I, we play lots of war games together. And one of the original war games that we played a lot, and we put in a lot of hours, was Rise of Nations, which is on Roblox. And it's a fun little game. I don't remember the year you start in. I want to say it was like 2019, something like that. You pick any country on Earth, and you play it. And I mean, by any country on Earth, like you can play Monaco. You can play Luxembourg. It can be anything. And the lesson that we kept learning time and time and time again, which meant that the game had good design, was you built your economy and you developed technology. That was your focus. War was sort of a secondary thing. it came after the technology and after the development of the economy, because there was no way to support it without those things. So here's what Elizabeth's problem is. If she wants to build an empire, her first step is she has to have a navy. The problem is there's no trees. So when the Roman Empire owned England, it owned England and Wales. When the Roman Empire owned that, it cut down most of the big forests, most of the old forests, to build its own navy. So it's the naval headquarters for that part of the Roman Empire was actually across the English Channel in Boulogne-sur-Mer. I don't actually know what the Romans called it. It was probably Boulogne-sur-Mer. Anyway, and that fleet was built with timber that was locally harvested, right? They didn't make the ships in Italy and then send them around the Strait of Gibraltar. They just built the ships right there with the materials right there, so they wiped out the English forests. And in a way, that was great for England, because it meant that England had a lot of farmland. It ended up with a lot of places to graze sheep, and it ended up with a lot of places to grow wheat. But it also meant that Elizabeth can't just build a fleet. So to build a fleet, she's going to have to buy the wood. Now, it turns out there are three fantastic places for her to get wood from. Canada and the United States. So North America, the problem is to get there, she needs ships. So that doesn't help her any. Sweden and Russia are the other two places. So she needs to pay in pounds sterling for the wood that she's going to buy from Sweden and Russia. But to do that, she needs to have an economic base, because she needs to have the money to pay for these ships. So she's caught in a loop, right? She needs the money. How does she get the money? She sets up trade. How does she trade? She needs ships. How does she get the ships? She needs the timber. How does she get the timber? With the money that she got from the trade that the ships gave her. In other words, she's stuck in a trap where she can't actually do anything unless she figures out an in. Turns out her father gave her an in. Her father was none other than the infamous Henry VIII. So Henry VIII, of course, is famous for his 6 wives, yada, yada, yada. Actually, we have to actually talk about this for a second. Right? In his obsession to have a son, he literally had Elizabeth I's mother, Anne Boleyn, executed. And then it turns out that Elizabeth I was probably, I think it's a fair statement to say, the greatest monarch in England's history. So the ironic twist was it turns out he didn't need a son to have an amazing legacy. His daughter was going to do it for him. But anyway, so that must have affected Elizabeth. There's no way that her personality came through that unscathed. Wait a minute. You didn't want me. You wanted a boy so much, you actually had my mother's head chopped off with a sword. Huh. Like, you do the math. Anyway, there was some abuse there. Elizabeth is blessed by her father's crazy, because in the process, her father became Protestant. That going Protestant meant, because what every Protestant state did was it went secular. So, when Sweden went Protestant, it went secular. When Saxony went Protestant, it went secular. Every Protestant state, when they converted to Protestantism and abandoned the Catholic Church, they went secular. Now, they didn't go secular because of some moral or ethical reason. They went secular because of 2 reasons. One, they wanted to get the church and they wanted to get religion out of their hair so that they could focus on politics. So, right, if you think about the structure of the government before the Protestant Reformation in Europe, it was a 3-tiered government. There was the king, who was a single individual but with a cabinet or some form of council, and then some group of advisors, and they would help him execute the law. And then there was the nobility. And in most European states, there was some kind of parliament by the time we get to Henry VIII. The English literally got parliament with the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. So there's the nobility has, some kind of legislative branch that they can rally around. And then the third branch of government was the church, the Catholic Church. And it interfered regularly in every state in Europe's affairs. And one of the reasons why the Catholic Church was able to do this was because they owned 1/4 of the land in Europe, in the Catholic part of Europe. So if you lived in Germany, 1 out of every 4 acres belonged to the Catholic Church. If you lived in England, 1 out of every 4 acres belonged to the Catholic Church. In Poland, 1 out of every 4 acres. In Italy, it was more, because the Catholic Church literally had its own state right through the center of Italy that we call the Papal States. So when you went secular, not only did you separate the church and get it out of your political system, so now it's just the nobility and the king making the decisions. They don't have to deal with the Catholic Church anymore. They also gave them the opportunity to seize all Catholic assets. In other words, going Protestant made you filthy rich, because as a king, you didn't really have much wealth. You might have had a little bit of land. If you had if you were part of a noble family that became a royal family, you probably still had your noble holdings. But as a general rule, kings weren't very powerful and they weren't very rich. The only way kings got their legislative agenda passed was they talked enough factions within the nobility into supporting them that those factions overwhelmed the factions that disliked them. Dislike their policies. And so what ends up happening now is you go from owning virtually nothing relative to the size of the state you live in to owning 1/4 of the state's land. And of course, there's no asset in the universe that's more valuable than land. Because when you think about it, right, everything we do requires land. We grow a crop, it requires land. There's a gold mine, it requires land. We travel from one point to the next point. Unless you're going by sea, it requires land. So there's this need to have land. And if you own 1/4 of your country, it allows you, if you're the king, to no longer need the nobility. Because before the Protestant Reformation, if you were the king, you went and you begged the nobles to support you. You begged the church to support you. Now you go to the nobles and you go, hey, because there's no church anymore. So you go to the nobles and you say, hey, I really want you to pass the following policy for me and fund it for me. If they say no, you go sell a chunk of land, take the money, and go do the policy anyway. Because you're just going to use your land sale, the revenue from land sales, to fund that policy. Now Elizabeth has a huge chunk of land. She can sell it and then use the money to buy the timbers to build her navy. Here's a problem. If she sells too much land, the price collapses and she won't actually make that much money off of it. So she needs to sell the land slowly and gradually. So the result is she can't build the navy she wants instantaneously because it's going to take her time to sell the land. So here's what she did. Instead of building 20 ships, let's say she had enough money for 20 ships. Instead of building 20 ships, she built 100 ships. And the way she did that was she went to the English merchant class and the English nobility, and she told them, look, I'm going to allow you to invest in my ships. And they said, what do we get for that? And she said, look, I'm going to put 20% down on every ship, so I'm going to own 20%. The remaining 80% of every ship can be purchased. If you buy 10% of a ship, you'll get 10% of the profit. So after we pay for the cost to operate the ship, you'll get 10%. And so what ended up happening was that there was a huge number of investors who kicked in and said, yeah, I'd like to do that.
Question real quick before we get too far away. How did they practically seize the land of the Catholic Church? Was there resistance from the church?
So one of the problems that the Catholic Church had was it didn't have standing army in any of these countries. So what there was is there were priests and monks and and nuns. And usually when a state became Protestant, it was a violent affair. They would go grab the nuns, the monks, the priests, and they would drag them physically out of the buildings, and they would just simply seize the land. In some cases, they set monasteries on fire. They usually preserve the churches and then turn them into Protestant churches. So if you go through the English countryside, you can actually find the ruins of old Catholic monasteries that have been, just over the last 5 centuries slowly decaying. But it was there was resistance in the sense that, there were monks who were like, I don't want to go, and they were dragged out and beaten, and they went because, well, might makes right. I mean, that's the lesson I keep learning. All right, so
Thanks for watching a sample of Dr. Roy's first class. We're really excited to begin with this first semester covering the American Civil War. It'll total 6 class sessions. We go live every Monday, and then afterwards we will post up the full resolution 4K video for archive view later. It's a little bit cleaner without any of the live glitches that come along with it. If you want to watch all the questions as they come in live or participate live, that's fantastic. We love it. That's kind of why we're doing the live sessions. But if you miss them, totally fine too. To join, you can go to the main channel, Dr. Roy Casagranda, and you can click the join button. Or under any video, you can click on the join button as well. So it might be different for iOS and other platforms, but just search around. It's a YouTube thing. Unfortunately, I can't send you a direct link because that's not a function that YouTube has available right now. So join as a student member, and student, you will become one of Roy's students. Thanks again, everyone.